The Golden Invitation. The Cape Town breeze carried the scent of jasmine and sea salt, but inside Lorado's penthouse, the air smelled of pure audacity. She sat at her mahogany desk, sealing 24 ivory envelopes with a custom wax stamp. This wasn't just a guest list, it was a curated museum of her romantic failures. From her high school sweetheart in Soweto to the billionaire she dumped in Santon, every man who had ever broken her heart, or had it broken by her, was invited. Her maid, Tondi, watched with wide eyes. "Ma'am, you are inviting the ghosts of Christmas past to your wedding? Thabo will be furious." Lorado laughed, her manicured finger tracing the calligraphy. Thabo, her fiancé, was a man of steel and silence, a tech mogul who prided himself on his control. He knew about the list, or at least he knew she wanted closure. He didn't know that Lorado didn't believe in closure. She believed in spectacle. "They think they are coming to see me fail, Tondi," Lorado whispered, tucking the final card into its sleeve. "They think they are the ones who got away, but by sunset at the Stellenbosch vineyards, they will realize they were just supporting actors in a play they didn't know I was writing." She stood up, her silk robe billowing. The invitations were sent. The trap was set. In 3 days, the most scandalous wedding in South African history would begin, and Lorado was ready to burn the bridge while standing on it. The Stellenbosch Valley was painted in hues of amber and gold as the fleet of luxury SUVs rolled onto the Lanzerac estate. One by one, the exes emerged, looking like a who's who of South African bachelors. There was Sipho, the rugged rugby star, Julian, the slick Cape Town architect, and Dumisani, the poet who had cheated on her with her own cousin. They eyed each other with a mixture of predatory curiosity and deep, burning discomfort. The tension in the reception lounge was thick enough to cut with a steak knife. Sipho adjusted his tight blazer, whispering to Julian, "Why are we here? Is she rubbing it in?" Julian smirked, though his eyes remained cold. "Lorado always loved an audience. She probably wants us to see what we lost." They were all convinced of their own importance, oblivious to the fact that they were being herded like cattle into a very expensive kraal. Lorato watched them from the balcony of the bridal suite. She sipped a vintage pinotage, her eyes cold and calculating. She had spent months tracking their lives, their bank accounts, and their darkest secrets. Every man in that room had wronged her in a way the world didn't yet know. They thought they were there to witness her union with Thabo. They didn't realize that Thabo was the only one in on the plan. "Let the games begin," she murmured. The first course was about to be served, and it was seasoned with a heavy dose of impending ruin. The rehearsal dinner was held under a canopy of fairy lights. The exes were seated at a long, singular table, facing the bride and groom. Thabo sat like a king, his hand possessively over Lorato's. As the wine flowed, the tongues loosened. Dumisani, the poet, stood up to give a mock toast. "To Lorato," he slurred, "the woman who could never choose just one of us, but finally settled for the one with the biggest bank balance." A hush fell over the garden. The other exes chuckled nervously, expecting a scene. Instead, Lorato smiled, a slow, predatory grin that didn't reach her eyes. "Dumisani, always so focused on balances," she said softly. She snapped her fingers, and a waiter placed a small silver tablet in front of each ex-boyfriend. "Since you all shared so much of my past, I thought I'd share a bit of your present. Open the folders labeled The Truth." The color drained from Dumisani's face as he tapped the screen. It wasn't just photos, it was a compiled dossier of his recent tax evasion and the secret family he kept in Durban. Beside him, Sipho gasped as he saw the leaked recordings of his match-fixing conversations. One by one, the guests realized that this wasn't a wedding invitation, it was a coordinated blackmail strike. Lorato wasn't celebrating her future, she was systematically dismantling theirs. The shocking truth was beginning to settle in. They weren't guests, They were hostages to their own filthy, hidden reputations. By midnight, the estate was a hive of panicked whispers. The exes had retreated to the cigar lounge, trying to form a united front. "She can't do this," Sipo hissed, his hands shaking. "If these files go public, we lose everything. My career, my sponsorships, gone." Julian, the architect, was silent, staring at the evidence of his structural fraud on the screen. He knew Lorato had the power to bury him under the very buildings he had designed with subpar materials. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors swung open. It wasn't Lorato who entered, but Thabo. He didn't look like a happy groom. He looked like a debt collector. He took a seat at the head of the table and lit a cigar. "My wife-to-be is a very sentimental woman," Thabo said, his voice a low rumble. "She kept every lie you ever told her, and I, being a man of technology, simply helped her organize those lies into a format that the authorities would find interesting." The men realized the terrifying truth. Thabo wasn't the victim of Lorato's vanity. He was her accomplice. They were a power couple built on the wreckage of those who had discarded her. Thabo leaned forward, the smoke curling around his head. "We don't want your money," he lied, though the glint in his eyes suggested otherwise. "We want your cooperation. There is a project Lorato is launching, a charity for betrayed women. You will all be the primary silent donors. Forever." The room felt like a tomb. The morning of the wedding was eerily calm. The sun rose over the vineyards, casting long shadows. Lorato sat in her dressing room, her white lace gown spread around her like a cloud. Her mother entered, looking worried. "Lorato, the men downstairs, they look like they're going to a funeral, not a celebration. What have you done, my child?" Lorato looked at her reflection, adjusting a diamond earring that cost more than Sipo's house. "I'm just taking back the interest on the tears I cried, Mama," Lorato replied calmly. She wasn't the broken girl they had left behind. She was a woman who had realized that in South Africa, reputation was the only currency that truly mattered. By bringing them all together, she had ensured they couldn't compare notes without exposing themselves. She had created a Mexican standoff where the only person with a loaded gun was the woman in the white dress. Downstairs, the exes were being forced to sign confidentiality agreements that were actually disguised transfer deeds in admissions of guilt. Thabo's lawyers moved among them like sharks. The men were trapped. If they left, the files were sent to the scorpions in the press. If they stayed, they had to watch the woman they burned ascend to a throne built on their secrets. The irony was delicious. Lorato grabbed her bouquet of black roses and white lilies. It was time to walk down the aisle and claim her ultimate prize. The ceremony was breathtaking. The altar was set against the backdrop of the mountains. The exes were forced to sit in the front row, acting as honorary groomsmen. Their faces were masks of agony as the music began. Lorato appeared at the end of the aisle, looking like an avenging angel. As she walked past Sipo, she dropped a single rose at his feet. As she passed Julian, she winked. It was a victory lap disguised as a wedding march. When she reached Thabo, the priest began the traditional rites. But when it came time for the "if anyone objects" part, a heavy, suffocating silence filled the air. Lorato turned around and faced the front row. She stared directly at Dumasani, the man who had cheated on her. Her eyes challenged him to speak. He looked down at his shoes, his pride completely extinguished. None of them moved. They were paralyzed by the digital nooses Lorato had tightened around their necks. "I do," Lorato said, her voice ringing out across the valley. "I do," Thabo echoed. When they kissed, it wasn't a kiss of romance. It was a seal on a business contract of the highest order. The audience cheered, unaware that the men in the front row were internally screaming. The goal was achieved. Lorado had not only married a billionaire, but she had also secured a lifetime of donations and silence from every man who had ever thought she was just a girl they could discard. The reception was a lavish affair. Caviar, moet, and the finest South African lamb. Lorado moved through the crowd, glowing. She stopped at the table where all her exes were huddled. "Are you enjoying the food, boys?" she asked, her voice dripping with honeyed venom. "It's paid for by the first installment of your donations." Sipo looked up, his face red. "You're a monster, Lorado. You used our past to destroy us." Lorado leaned in close, her scent of expensive perfume filling his lungs. "No, Sipo, I used your actions to destroy you. I just provided the platform." She then turned to the entire room and raised her glass. "A toast," she shouted, "to the men in the front row. Without their lies, their cheating, and their arrogance, I would never have become the woman I am today. They taught me that the only person you can trust is the one who helps you hide the bodies." The guests laughed, thinking it was a cheeky, metaphorical joke. The exes didn't laugh. They realized then that the shocking part wasn't just the blackmail. It was that Lorado had never loved Thabo either. Thabo was the ex of her greatest rival, a woman who had once tried to ruin Lorado's father. This entire wedding was a double cross. Lorado had teamed up with Thabo to ruin everyone who had ever stepped on her path. The scandal was deeper than just a few broken hearts. As the moon rose over Stellenbosch, the exes were finally allowed to leave, but they left as shadows of their former selves. Their bank accounts were drained, their secrets were held in a cloud server controlled by Thabo, and their dignity was a memory. Lorado stood at the gates of the estate, watching the line of taillights disappear into the darkness. She felt a lightness she hadn't known in a decade. She had achieved her goal, total, absolute power. Thabo walked up behind her and handed her a glass of brandy. "They're gone," he said. "The transfers are complete. Your charity for vulnerable women is now the best-funded NPO in the country, and my rival's reputation is in tatters by association." Lorado turned to him, a cold smile on her lips. "We make a good team, Thabo. Perhaps we should actually try being married for a month before the divorce papers are filed." Thabo laughed. "A month sounds perfect, just long enough to ensure the assets are fully merged." Lorado looked back at the empty road. She had invited her exes to her wedding not for closure, but for a payday. She had socked them by turning her heartbreak into a high-stakes heist. As the wind picked up, she felt no regret. She was the bride who had everything, and all it cost was the souls of the men who thought they could break her. The story of the century was over, and Lorado had won.